of the day. Here at the expert stage, I'm Lou Kerner. I'm with a company called Blockchain Co-Investors. We're a crypto fund-to-fund invested in 40 of the leading crypto VCs around the world. But I'm most passionate in crypto about community. And and so I'm excited to be here, part of this amazing community event. The Metaverse Summit has really been amazing. We've got a great panel here, and they're going to talk about new ownership models, and I'm super interested to hear what they've got to say about identity, because that's where it really all starts. So let's give them a big hand.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. I'm Flavien, Community Manager of Blockchain Game Alliance. We are an organization committed to promoting blockchain within the gaming industry, and we have the pleasure to have 400 companies in the BGA right now, and I see some of them in the front actually. Actually, the idea is obviously to let them give visibility to all projects. We want to be the community of professionals involved in the blockchain space, and want to be involved in the gaming industry as well. Gathering a lot of education, capitalizing on the expertise of everyone in the BGA to talk about subjects like guilds, like esport, like blockchain gaming on AVAX, of a lot of things, and actually this kind of opportunity with our wonderful speakers. So it's going to be an interesting subject. And at first, I would like to let every one of you, starting with SARO, to introduce yourself.
Hi, great to be here. SARO McKenna, CEO of Dakoko. We've produced the blockchain game Alien Worlds. So Alien Worlds is the largest blockchain game by users. You can see that data at DEFRAIRE.com. We have over 7.5 million lifetime users and a couple 100,000 per day. Alien Worlds is an NFT and DAO metaverse. So you use NFTs to play the game to earn the fungible token Trillium, which you can then stake into our 6 competitive planet DAOs. So we see DAOs as components within the game itself, rather than just a way of organizing part of the project token. And looking forward to chat about NFTs today.
Thank you. Hi there. So I'm SAJJAD. I'm the head of Europe at Unstoppable Domains. Unstoppable Domains is the leader in user-owned identity in Web3 and the biggest provider of NFT domain names. So essentially our NFT domain names like SAJJAD.NFT are minted as Polygon NFTs that can become your universal wallet address or single sign-on to dApps. And yeah, prior to Unstoppable Domains, I spent 8 years in games. I was the VP of Biz Dev at Twitch for EMEA, and before that, the VP of Strategy for Jagex. So very familiar with the game space and excited to talk about how this conversation connects.
Okay, thanks. My name's Alexander Hobbs. I'm the Director of Science at Sonata. We are a new layer 1 blockchain built around the concept of a blockchain for data, or blockchain for files. So if you imagine what Bitcoin did for money, with that first initial blockchain-based solution for decentralized money, we do the same for data of any kind, files of any kind. We do this through an entirely new type of ledger. It's like a two-way ledger rather than a one-way ledger. We provide ownership to files that is governed by blockchain. And our first use case is gaming. So I'm very excited to be here at the BGA panel to discuss how all that will play out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So subject is new ownership and utilities models for NFTs. And NFTs have this principle of scarcity based on its non-fungibility. We know that. And we add this layer of complexity with smart contracts, and this layer of complexity could be a lot of things. And very happy to have these speakers, because based on a lot of expertise, different expertise, scientists, unstoppable domain as well, with this idea of identity, digital identity, and a game. So it's going to be very interesting to have a view of everything about how to create utilities and ownership in NFT. And actually, it will be my first question for everyone, starting with you, Sarah. How do you create utilities with NFT in your game?
Yeah, so our NFTs are utility NFTs. They are read by the game smart contract. So you must have a land NFT and a tool NFT to mine. and later you'll need certain other types of NFTs like weapons and minions to be able to play the fighting game. So we build these NFTs on the Wax blockchain. And the type of NFT standard that's built there allows attributes to be encoded into the NFTs that are read by the game smart contracts. And I think, interestingly, not just by our smart contracts. So, we've initially put out these NFTs and we run certain games that are extremely popular that require the person to have these NFTs in their wallet when they're playing the game. But in fact, our community members have also begun to make little mini games, less technically complex, but that are able to read the attributes in the NFTs for their own games. And that's actually one of the sort of thought processes that we increasingly have gone through with subsequent series of NFTs and subsequent games that we've created, such as the games that we created on the Binance Smart Chain, which came after the games that we created on Wax, was actually creating slightly more open-ended attributes that the community could then use. So for example, in our BSC NFTs, we have a set of crafting keys, which is just a letter from A to F. This is very open-ended, and the community can use this in lots of really simple ways. So for example, entrance to an event might require that you have a crafting key of B, or you might need a combination of certain keys in order to do something, even just events or competitions that are being run by the community on Twitter. So I think it's important to remember that NFTs are just objects that people own in their wallets. We as the initial creators of those NFTs, and then also have some games sort of developed, I guess, the original use cases for those NFTs within our game. But the community is taking that forward in different ways, and I think that's an important element of provable ownership, is that then that thing can have a use beyond what the original creators intended.
Actually, this is interesting, Saro. I wanted to ask another question based on what you just say. So the game was initially based on Wax, still is, but you also did it on BNB as well. It's a choice in terms of different utilities, or depending on the kind of blockchain you would like to be on, you choose another utilities based on the game.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. The different NFT standards allow different types of attributes, a number of attributes, and so on to be, and some immutable, some mutable, to be, recorded into the NFT. And this then creates the opportunity for different game mechanics.
Great. Thank you very much. SAJJAD, how do you create utilities with NFTs for Unstoppable Domain?
Yeah, I think at the highest order, there are essentially two ways we're creating utility. So firstly, and at the highest order, that looks like we're simplifying UX for Web3. UX for Web3 is hard, and one of the challenges in driving adoption. The second thing is we're enabling people to own their identities on the internet. So when it comes to simplifying UX, the principle is that one of the things we solve for is simplifying sending and receiving crypto. So sending to long wallet addresses, juggling different wallet addresses is hard. And that we simplify that by enabling you to link over 275 tokens to different wallet addresses that you can then link back to one NFT domain name, like SARO.NFT. From thereafter, you can use that domain name in hundreds of wallets, sometimes in the game, in a wallet itself, in an exchange, to send and receive crypto with that name. So you don't have to worry about getting it wrong or losing it. The second thing is probably more powerful and relevant in the context of games. So we enable people to own their identity. And I'm coming from the Web 2 world. I've been here for 4 months. So one of the challenges I faced was that I had been very active on LinkedIn for a few years. So I had 4,000 odd connections. And there was no easy way to take that reputation and that network to Twitter. I had not been active on Twitter. And I thought this needs to change. That power should not remain on the platform, but should be in the hands of the user. And I think that's something we're trying to achieve. So the principle is that we enable you to mint that domain name as a Polygon NFT, and you can use it to log into hundreds of dApps. As of today, we have 165 dApps, including many metaverses, social dApps, messaging dApps, so on and so forth, DeFi, of course. And you can then log in with that name. But that simplifies the UX, but what it also does is enable you to permission data, bring data to a dApp, and over time, link data back to your on-chain record on the NFT. In theory, over time, as we do more of this, we'll have thousands of dApps integrated, and users are able to take data from one dApp to another. So these domains that are controlled by the user, owned by the user, are not rented, become the connecting thread for an open metaverse, right? So if you're going to a new dApp, you're not starting from zero. You can actually show them what verified data you have and get better benefits and even transact on that value.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And actually, I like what you said about being able to transfer your experience, skills, a level of skills into one LinkedIn to Twitter makes so much sense as a player as well. Being able to transfer your experience in a game, your contribution to a specific community, games into games makes so much sense as well. So, for Zenota, how do you create utilities yourself?
Okay, well, this is going to be a bit of an infrastructure kind of argument because we are fundamentally an infrastructure layer. We're not an application. The idea is that applications were built on us in the same way that applications built on Ethereum or Solana or Cardano, etc., and so on. So we're a new version of that. And so I want to talk about the utility that comes from having a full concept of ownership of your assets. Right now, this is kind of a conceptual question and issue, but the world is, I think, already realizing that the kind of ownership that you have that's defended by NFTs as they currently exist is not complete, right? So what we offer is actually two types of asset on our blockchain. One is our answer to an NFT, and it's quite similar to an NFT, but it fundamentally exists on the layer 1 ledger without the need for a smart contract to trade it with a payment or even for another asset. And that's an incredibly powerful concept because that drastically simplifies what you need to do. It allows for huge scalability and it removes the potential problem for bugs in your smart contract to suddenly lose you $1 million or even $1 billion, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing we have is in what we think of as an extension to the NFT concept, which we call an NFA, which stands for a non-fungible asset. So this is sort of realizing the idea that fundamentally all you own when you have an NFT is the token on the blockchain. You don't actually own the file that is linked from the token. And this is a problem. We're already seeing this in court disputes and so on. So what we did is we took our blockchain and we imparted a form of governance to off-chain files, which is a stronger form of ownership. So this is sort of on the par of how you would own property in the real world. That's the idea. And it comes down to essentially 3 pillars of ownership that we defined. The first one is uniqueness, which we do by imparting a unique encoding scheme to each asset so that each asset, not only the individual owning the asset, but each asset has its own identity in the digital space. The second one is access and control, which we manage through encryption. And the third one is privacy, which we manage through a second kind of encryption. Now, privacy is not necessarily desired in every case, so that's more of an optional extra. But with those 3 pillars, you can create a form of ownership which is on par to ownership in the physical world. So the utility of either of those things, firstly, as I said, both of them are traded on the layer 1, which means that you don't need a complicated smart contract to do that, to make that trade. It's happening over this two-way ledger that I described. And the second one is that stronger form of ownership combined with that safety you get from not having potential bugs means that you could onboard, for example, traditional financial institutions, and you could collateralize, you could turn these assets into financial products in the same way that you do with real assets. So that's where we come from in terms of utility.
And actually, I just wanted to add one thing, which is we're in the interest of driving adoption, right? We're trying to make the adoption super frictionless for NFT domain names. So anybody who wants to try one can come to our booth and get a free NFT domain name if they want around today.
Awesome. Free promotion. I like it. Actually, coming back to you, SAJJAD, you mentioned that earlier, but I would like to go deep into this subject of ownership, so owning your in-game assets. So as a player, how do you see the action of unstoppable domain for player to be able to prove their ownership of their in-game assets and prove their digital identity through the different games?
Yeah. So I think let's take the two perspectives here, right? One is the direct duty perspective and then the broader perspective. So the NFT domains we provide, once you mint them, they're in your wallet, they're yours forever. and essentially it's not a rental-based model, it's an ownership-based model. Once you mint an NFT domain, I think then the question is really about ownership, but ownership is linked to interoperability, right? So when you go and log into games, you create value there, you perform certain tasks which allow you to progress as a gamer. You collect some NFTs as well that show your progress and proficiency as a gamer. If they can only have value, it can transact on that basis in the future. So I think one of the key things is that as over time, we see a lot more of these game applications hopefully becoming more interoperable, and that's when the utility of NFTs goes up, because essentially they're identity. So if you're able to take those NFTs, that verified information of your performance or your ownership of certain assets in games from one app to the other, for every unit increase in interoperability, we will see a manifold increase in utility for these game assets. And I think that's collectively good for Web3 and for blockchain gaming.
Actually, a lot of games have their own choice in terms of what could be the blockchain they would like to build on. Is it a challenge for you to build what you want to build in terms of interoperability, facing a lot of games building on the different blockchains?
So our NFTs are minted on Polygon, but we are very much focused on being as interoperable as possible and chain agnostic. So over time, I think this challenge will resolve. There are certain challenges, and the technicalities are too manifold, so I can't really go into each of them. But I think over time, we would look to support as many blockchains as possible. Yeah.
Okay, great. I would like to make a pause. Obviously, if you have any question, we'd have an AMA session just after that. So feel free to prepare your question, and we will make sure to address it to the speakers. And yeah, SARO, you mentioned it earlier, the importance of your community, the community itself, to leverage utilities for the games. Could you talk about it more, about how you use your community to develop the utilities of the NFTs?
Yeah, so I think one of the really interesting kind of features of blockchain communities is that the tokens describe the system itself. And that's actually the distinction between Web3 systems and Web2 systems, is that they're tokenized, and the tokens and the widely held nature of the tokens is what then defines actually the sort of perimeter, in our case of the metaverse, but is also then why you have all of these people feeling like owners and being owners of the system. That is a consequence of blockchain, of those applications running on blockchains, and the fact that then users have provable ownership of the assets. And it's a really, it then opens up all of this activity and all of this energy from the community, because they own, in our case, the fungible token, the NFTs, the DAO tokens, which describes their membership of certain communities. And they feel an emotional connection, in fact, with all of those tokens, even the fungible token, especially because we've built certain tokenomic mechanisms that give them membership of communities because of their ownership of the fungible token. So even something as sort of abstract, I guess, as a fungible token, which really only describes aggregate value, still has an emotional quality for people because they can use it in order to become members of, in our case, these various DAOs that are competing with each other. And the NFTs as well, they are using them as differentiating signals of being part of different communities. So, for example, we had a bunch of abundant NFTs. They were called gray peacemakers, and they became extremely abundant. And there was this one part of the community that was advocating for them all to be burned. And so there was an address where you could send in your gray peacemakers to get burned. But then, because it was called Gray Peacemaker, there was another part of the community that we thought, oh, that's like really violent. And so, we should save the gray peacemakers. And so there was this Save the Gray Peacemakers thing. And yeah, I mean, there's lots of our abundant NFTs where that kind of stuff has happened, where people have tried to come up with solutions for using them, because essentially, they don't have much market value. But then at the other end of the spectrum are really valuable NFTs, which are land NFTs, and they're each on a planet. I mean, that's created just so much activity and so much entrepreneurial innovation and creativity. So if you own land on Neri or on FLAVIEN, those guys have their own Discord channels, their own Telegram channels. They're organizing their own competitions, and they are self-organizing economic mechanisms of renting and promotions and so on, all of which happened naturally and organically because of the economic stake that our community members had in the system. And just one little sidebar on this, it's that you've got to be prepared to give enough of your system away in order to achieve that, right? So, and this is, I think, what instinctively within crypto we sort of understand, but I think Web 2 doesn't really understand that, right? Because their whole instinct is to be proprietary, to own things, you know, whereas I think the instinct of most, especially kind of, you know, earlier crypto adopters is to understand that you need to create a community, you need to give ownership away, and then of course the entire system is elevated.
Interesting. So you're saying that once you started to open up the gate about the lands that you will be able to launch in the game, you open up a lot of possibilities for new utilities in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was an explosion of activity. And then actually one of the interesting things is that we, of course, look at what the community is doing and then start to find ways of systematizing that, or we create technology to facilitate it. This is something that Axie did as well, for example, because they have the guilds arising naturally, and then they actually codified that mechanism within their game. This is a really nice thing that oftentimes the community will just start to do something, and then if you're smart and you have enough time and your developers are able to do it, then you can look at that and say, well, we can make that easier for people. But actually other parts of the community did that. So, I mean, fairly significantly, there was an entire company that created a business in Alien Worlds that's just facilitating certain NFT drops and NFT creation services. And this was because they saw that various community members were just trying to like hack it themselves, and they thought, well, there's a business model and we'll do it.
Awesome. Alexander, building a new technology yourself with Zenota, what's your opinion about what's happening in the blockchain space in terms of level of utilities through the different month, year, and how do you see that involved in the time?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's obviously an incredibly fast evolving space. What I find extremely interesting, and to touch on Sarah's point there, was the involvement of the community is really exciting because it is going to change the model that we currently have, at least in terms of gameplay. Right now, when it comes to metaverses, it's not too difficult of a sell, but games fundamentally require developers to have, as it stands at the moment, basically godlike control over every asset within their game. Okay, now. Once we start moving, as we already are, to a community-owned model, then that relationship between the player and the developer is going to have to change, right? It's going to become more collaborative. And of course, there's still going to have to be a lot of scope for developers to modify or manipulate or adapt the items in their game so that the gameplay works. But you're also going to have a community of gamers who actually have legal claims to these assets, right? Now that's something which I think it's maybe a little bit scary to game developers, but personally I see it as a very exciting development. Now we were at Develop Brighton last week, which is one of the biggest developer conferences, game developer conferences, and whilst the general reception to our being from blockchain company was positive, there were one or two who were sort of the standard kind of knee-jerk reaction of like, nope, blockchain isn't going to solve anything, nope. And then I think one of them I was having a conversation, and he was talking about well, hang on, that's not going to work because you're going to have to have items from one. You're talking about having items from one game. If you're talking about interoperability used in another game, that doesn't make any sense. You're going to have to adapt those items so that the gameplay works. That's going to be a huge job. And I just said to him, well, to me, that sounds like you're describing an entirely new industry, which for me is very exciting. So I didn't see that as a negative at all. I'm imagining an entirely new career base, form of study, work, whereby you are that person that takes an item from one game and adapts it so that it can be used in another game. whether you call that like an asset translator or something, it's that for me is defining a new industry. So, yes, I get it isn't the current model, but to use a line from Rick and Morty, I'm sure every caveman that sees a microwave thinks it's a rock cabinet, right? The point of inventing is to make things that don't exist, right? So for me, that's an exciting concept, and yes, it will take time, but I think that's something that we're going to see happening.
Awesome, thanks. Actually, one rhetorical question for everyone. Maybe starting with SAJJAD, if you want. Physical goods versus digital goods. Who has the most utility?
Yeah, let's go into philosophy, right? So, love that. So, I think with a caveat, yes, digital goods could have more utility. But, I was thinking about this question yesterday, right, when I was trying to think of what I'd say this one. And I went back to the academic definition of utility and trying to see, and I think a lot of it is context-driven, right? How strong and how long the context lasts determines utility of an item. So if you're on an island, deserted island, right, with no water, a glass of fresh water probably has more utility than a $50 bill. If you're in the priority queue, right? So if you're onboarding to an aircraft and you're paying for that priority boarding, every person that gets added to that queue for priority boarding and buys into that, the utility of paying for that goes down. So similarly, right, if we find an asteroid with 10 times the gold that's on Earth, the utility of gold and the value of utility of gold will go down as well. So I think it's context-based. Now, in the context of digital goods, well, yes, I think we live in a physical world, so there are more contexts where physical goods will matter more to us. If we were to upload our consciousness into a digital realm, then that would change, and that's the sort of, and then the question comes in, what is physical? I think, though we are increasingly spending more time in digital worlds now, so the value of those goods will increase, and it can have more utility at times than a physical good.
Yeah, SARO, how do you tackle that subject?
Yeah. I think we're showing our age a little bit, honestly, in in posing that question in that way, because I really feel that people who, digital natives don't really see the world along that fault line. It's all experiences, it's all different kinds of consumption, it's all networking with different types of people, and I just don't think that distinction is so much what matters to them. I think perhaps, we're also part of the world, and it matters, what matters to us too, and in fact what the elderly people find valuable. But I think that is a distinction that is probably becoming less relevant over time. But instead, what matters is the fundamental quality of those experiences that we're having, the longevity of them, the legacy potential of them. One thing that I think is an issue with many digital goods so far has been as you say, the sort of context-specific nature, but also the duration of applicability. Like, everything's changing so quickly that stuff becomes obsolete. So I think that's one of the great things about blockchain technology, is that those assets will remain. Now, the use and the community that they'll have around them will change, but at least they still exist in perpetuity. Awesome.
Alexander, what is your edge?
Yeah, I think my other two fellow panelists are absolutely right. The parallel digital world is coming in many senses. It's already here, and there's no putting the genie back in that bottle. I was reading a study just been done that said 77% of those surveyed in America would prefer. This is now talking about music rather than gaming, but would prefer to own the songs that they have rather than stream them. 70% said they preferred digital assets to physical assets, which that's incredibly high. I was really quite surprised by that. And 89% said that they felt a personal connection to their digital assets and they would be very upset if they lost them. So we're already seeing that shift in society. Now, possibly they were a slightly younger generation, as you point out, but we're definitely already seeing that. The question is are we going to be able to reproduce the rights that we have as individuals in the physical world, in the real world, in the digital world? And I think if we don't do that, then things could turn out badly. So that's my focus, that's our focus at Sonata, is making sure that the ownership, the rights that people have in the digital world matches as far as possible the rights that they have in the physical world. So what we did at Zenotta is we solved, you've all heard of the double spend problem with Bitcoin and blockchain in general. What we did is we solved the double spend problem for rights. Right now that's a key issue here because the internet is a machinery of communication, but it can't deal with rights. It can just deal with information. The reason why it can't deal with rights is because rights have value. If you just transferring information, it doesn't matter about double spend, essentially. But if you're transferring something with value, then you can't be spending it twice. You can't give a right to someone and give that exact same right to somebody else, right? So that's a really important distinction. So as long as we get that, I think it's going to be really exciting. And I think yeah, as to Sajid's point, this concept of utility of physical assets being greater than that of digital assets, I think that's very arbitrary. A lot of the time I hear that. Yes, there's maybe two things, food, water, three things, food, water, and a roof over your head. Anything else is pretty much arbitrary depending on the particular value that it gives you in a particular context. For example, if you're a footballer as a hobby and you want to get better at that, then you buy football boots. But those football boots don't have any utility beyond just helping you achieve goals within the community that you care about, right? So I think that's important to remember, is that physical goods can have that same level of utility, but we have to make sure we own them properly.
As a last question before the AMA, I would like to ask again you, Alexander, about maybe a more technical point of view. How do you see Layer 1 have an impact of innovations in these utilities, new utilities that we will be able to see for NFTs?
Yeah, so the Layer 1 concept is actually very, very important. It's something which has been lost, I think, because you had a few first kind of good Layer 1s, and then people built, particularly in the case of Ethereum, right, people built on top of them, issued token standards through smart contracts on top, Layer 2s and so on, because of the scalability problem. But if you can fix the scalability problem, then fundamentally the Layer 1 is a blockchain. It's the network that is defended by a distributed consensus mechanism, whether that's proof of work or proof of stake. We're proof of work, full disclosure. We are a modified form, which is more environmentally friendly, avoids the problems of re-centralization, but we believe that proof of work is the fundamental consensus algorithm, and you want to defend your ownership of assets on the chain with that consensus mechanism. And if you don't, then you are kind of losing out on what a blockchain has to offer, and you're sort of re-centralizing solutions. So that's really important. As I mentioned, our blockchain was designed around being a blockchain for files, for data, but also for trade. So what we realized was that the Bitcoin blockchain, which was the first invention of blockchain, even though they didn't even call it blockchain in the white paper, it was actually just meant for one purpose, which was a form of money that is decentralized. That's it, right? It wasn't meant for trade. What's happening is that people have taken that model, and now everyone's trying to build an economy on top of it. But an economy needs trade, and when you have what is essentially a one-way ledger, then all the blockchain can do is send, right? It can't trade. Now, that's why smart contracts have to come in, additional complexity, additional worries around bugs causing problems. But if you redesign your blockchain, as we have done, and you make it a two-way ledger, then suddenly you get that trade for free, which is a really powerful concept.
Awesome, thank you very much. Thank three of you of letting us know more about the utilities and the ownership for NFTs and what future will be in terms of services for games. As a player as well, it was very nice to have you on the stage. And if you have any question for the speakers, please raise your hand. I see one there.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. I think with Web3 we have a unique opportunity also to create a more inclusive and accessible world. However, also what I'm seeing right now recently with a lot of the Web3 and NFT experience, that it's creating very exclusive experience to me, and almost like creating this like social inequality that we're seeing a lot in the physical world. Experience that can only be unlocked if you have specific NFTs, or you can only play certain games if you have this NFT, and then people showing off their expensive NFTs in their virtual museums. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on this topic and how we can make utilities also more accessible.
Yeah, I mean, I think as someone who's transitioning from I guess Web 2 games to Web 3, I couldn't agree more. So I was actually looking at how the space is shaping, and I think coming from Amazon, right, where we had a very strong principle of working backwards from our customers, I thought, who are the customers here? So when you build blockchain games, right, you're looking at who your customers are, and the two predominant form of customers would be the players, but then also investors, and that is super important to create distinction between those two. I think of late, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of projects have purely been building for investors, focusing too much on what tokenization means, how quickly those can be ramped up and taken to market, whereas not focusing enough on gameplay, building community, and creating that sort of really persistent, lasting context for a game. And eventually, lo and behold, we have seen a route in play to earn. So I think this is an inflection point, which cannot be repeated, won't make this sort of space sustainable. People have to build for the players, as they have. CS has seen the success in mobile games and other live game categories. So I think that change is very much needed, and I agree there. I think that would come through by focusing on gameplay equally, right? That's something that, and making this accessible, enabling people to onboard. Otherwise, the problem we're facing in Web3 in general and in Web3 games will be a challenge that can be damaging to the space in the long term.
Yeah, I was on a panel a while ago and somebody said kind of what will be the measure of when we've moved to Web 3 versus Web 2, and my answer to that was when our mindset shifts and we're actually thinking natively in those terms of decentralization, of everybody being on an equal footing. Even if some people have more stake in the system, everyone has the same rights and everyone is on the same footing. And I think that question sort of touches on that distinction, because what is so brilliant about blockchain technology is that, especially, public blockchains are open for anyone to build on. They're permissionless. And so you can build your own application, and it requires, maybe networking with other people, meeting other people, gaining new skills, learning how to code, or finding people who can. I just think that that's so brilliant. You don't have to ask anyone's permission to create your own community that has your own values, and that even enforces those values. You can't enforce those values on other people, but you can enforce them within your own context where people have agreed to be part of that and to be bound by that collective shared sense of values. So that's brilliant, and you should do that, and so should everybody in this room who has a particular vision for how this space can unfold. We don't have to wait for other people to tell us how to build this. We are all building it together, and that's why things like this are so important, meeting the people that can augment your skills. And then I guess the other thing is that the industry is still very young, right? So there's a little bit of immaturity still in it, I think. People have a lot of love for their communities and even their tokens that kind of represent their membership of those communities, but I think that there's lots of different strands within crypto, and if you don't like a particular vibe somewhere, you can find your own tribe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't need to add too much to that because that was pretty complete. I will say, that this idea of equality of opportunity in the digital space is far better than in the real world. Now, what people do with that equality of opportunity is some people are better at it or put more work into it, and then they end up the 1% of that particular area, and it's not a lot you can do about that fundamentally. It's the Matthew effect, right? But what digital spaces, what digital assets do is that they do provide that complete equality of access, which is that it's not in any way influenced by race or gender or sexuality or anything like that, and that's really important. So it's fundamentally a better bedrock to build on for exactly that kind of equality concept.
Yeah, I'll add something here, right? And I think real life is, unfortunately, in many ways, pay to win, right? That's what and we don't want to have that predominantly in this space long term. So there is an opportunity with blockchain to do that, and I think it's up to the builders in this space to go and fulfill that opportunity.
For the last question.
Thank you. Hi guys. I work in sports marketing, and in the football world we've seen a lot of Premier League clubs and other clubs around Europe jumping on the NFT bandwagon now. Some of that's to replace diminishing sponsorship revenues and stuff, but in general, the strategy and the activation of NFTs in the football world has been pretty poor. Does the panel think that NFTs play a part in fan engagement in the future, and if so, why?
Yeah, I would love to say I think NFTs and also DAOs play a big role in fan engagement. And DAOs, by the way, can own NFTs and issue NFTs. The reason is that any system that has different stakeholders that you want to acknowledge their participation and track it and then have governance rights associated with that are the perfect types of systems for a DAO. So for example, in the case of a football club, you could have the club itself owning a quarter of the tokens, maybe the players owning part of it, the fans owning, you know, a nice allocation of the tokens. You might have other brands or other stakeholders, and then they all get to vote, and they govern that treasury collectively, including the NFTs in that treasury. They can receive NFTs, and they can send them, and that creates these kind of interesting collaborative cross-holding mechanisms. They can also do that with the fungible tokens. So that's a perfect, in fact, we see that as one of the key use cases of DAO technology, which is another type of tokenized crypto asset, to describe systems that include lots of stakeholders and then to benefit from all of the energy and ingenuity of all of those stakeholders in a system.
First, I will say that I don't know why all of the football teams want to build their own things themselves. And when we talk about it, and I listened to a lot of panels here, and all we talked was Web2 not so willing to participate, to collaborate in the space with everyone, to share knowledge, to share what they want to share. And Web3 being at the opposite of that, all about collaboration with everyone to build something together. And yes, I think the bad action made by the football teams were on that. They wanted to launch their own NFT and just asking their community to participate. But if you have another thing, SARO, I think you're familiar with SARO. I think why they are so good, they involve the community in a way, like it's not just about selling your favorite player for a large amount of money. It's to be willing to have a strong community of who is the best player in specific teams. It's not about the team itself, it's about the community behind, and we talk about it a lot, the community behind the teams, and I think that could be one of the things that they are not doing good, but it's cool to see that they are the most interesting in NFTs and blockchain related to gaming as well.
So I'll just add something very quickly there, which is that what you mentioned about fan engagement actually is a really exciting concept. If you can provide proper ownership over files, what you can do is that you can create a relationship with in the case of football, with the players and the fans that is far closer and far more personal than it's ever been before, right? Because you can give if they own the NFT. Or in our case, the NFA of a ticket, for example, then that could allow them access to exclusive events, meet and greets with the players, discounts on future tickets, and so on and so forth. Now, imagine how complicated all of that would be if you had to have humans pushing paper around, or potentially emails around, to make it all work, right? That would be extremely complex. But if you can do that automatically through the blockchain, then you've opened up an entire world of sort of fan engagement with the players that we don't have right now.
Yes, SAJJAD, I know that I have so many faces staring at me that we don't. So I will say you have some seconds, because I'm going to be the one who will be beat. You can continue if you have something to say.
Just very quickly, I think my fellow panelists have covered it pretty well, but being a fan is also a big part of your identity. So yes, I think in the context of what we're trying to do in terms of our mission, it can play a massive role. And the creators, in sports, so on and so forth. So absolutely, yeah.
Thanks again, everyone. It was great to have you.